Okay. It's very heartfelt to look out and see how many people are in this room. Thank you for coming, because she's an amazing speaker. My name is Dot Butler. I'm the program manager for the Winchester Coalition for a Safer Community. I operate out of the Winchester Health Department, and we're just so excited to have Phyllis here. Phyllis has presented for us before, but it was on Zoom.
Not the same.
But how lucky we are to have her in person tonight. It's just, yeah, I can't say it enough. She's not foreign to this area. She grew up in Newton, so she as I said, with our sports teams, we always was very competitive in Winchester High School. However, we often ruled, so I'm proud of that. Tonight we are being taped. I don't promote that, because there's nothing worse for a speaker to come and talk to an empty room. So, I didn't tell anybody. Now, you can go back and tell your friends that we are taping it, and when Cam is gracious enough to do it, they will edit it, and they will let me know when it's available. I will put it in all the newsletters, the link, so you may even want to watch it again and again, because she has some unbelievable tips. As you know, she is the author of Middle School Matters, but then now she has a new book out, Middle School Power is Raising Resilient Twins and Teens and Twins, which is ever so true. We have some school people here too. I'm so glad you're here, that you carry the message back to our district as well. I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Okay.
I've done enough talking, but thank you for coming. There will be a Q&A, or do you want questions as you go along, or how would you like to proceed?
I'm going to cover a ton, so it might make sense to wait until the end and see if I get to it. And I'll talk really fast because I'm a Bostonian, and I'm finally in a room where people will still be able to follow me, which is very nice.
Okay, well, the floor is yours.
Okay.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you. I don't usually get to present in a room this beautiful. I feel like I'm really getting the quintessential New England experience with this museum. It's just so charming, and this exhibit is great, so maybe you'll even get a chance to look at all the photographs afterwards. I am a school counselor by day, and I am doing a lot of presenting right now because of my new book, which means that I'm hearing from kids at other schools too, and from teachers and parents in lots of different communities. And the one thing that really has struck me in the last few months is that unlike elementary and unlike high school, and I've worked in all age groups, and I work in private practice with all age groups, and I have 3 kids of my own, 2 who are in college and 1 who's 15. And something that's really struck me is that it doesn't matter if I'm in the United States or in Canada. It doesn't matter if I'm talking to a public school or an independent school, or if high SES, a more diverse socioeconomic distribution, if it's a high achievement area, if it's a more chill area, south, west, doesn't matter. The needs and the characteristics of the kids are the same. And I think that is what sets middle schoolers apart. It's why I write about this age group, because when I first got to a middle school, I thought I would have it all together because I had done high school, I had done elementary, I had these kids of my own. I was really living the middle school dream because I had 2 in my house at the time. Showed up and thought, oh my gosh, I am not prepared at all. The parents wanted to know what had happened to their charming kids. The teachers were personalizing things that the kids were doing, and they wanted my guidance. And because I had been a journalist in a former life, I decided to go looking for whatever I could find, just nerd out and get the materials that I needed, and it just didn't exist. And that's how I started writing about this age group. And I can't decide what I like more, working with these kids or writing about it, but it's that back and forth that really keeps me really invested in this work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my recent book and how it relates to middle schoolers. So middle school superpowers, I was never going to write this book. Middle School Matters was supposed to be the what to expect when you're expecting a middle schooler, one and done. I never set out to write a book, I just felt I had to. And then we had the pandemic. And we're actually doing a lot better. Kids are doing a lot better. And it's not that the pandemic alone has impacted kids. It's the constellation of everything happening, from the uncertainty in the world, the chaos, the emotion contagion that they're experiencing from parents, not getting some of their needs met, even a few years ago, is having these long-term repercussions. In every area, they're lagging, their social skills in particular. And I've been saying this a lot, and I really believe it. Yes, we have this spike in mental health issues. Yes, there's more anxiety, there's more depression, there's more suicidal ideation. And much of what we see as a mental health issue is actually a skills deficit. They're sad because they want to have friends and they don't have close friends and they don't know how to connect. They're anxious because they're overwhelmed and they can't get organized. And that ability to do what's called future planning, to predict how your work today will impact what you produce tomorrow, doesn't even kick in until age 15. And young adolescents don't work smarter or harder because they think the stakes are high. The part of the brain that is related to goal optimization also is pretty weak in young adolescents. And so we might be trying really hard to impress upon them that they should get the work done on Sunday if they have hockey on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and a big project due on Thursday, and that is not going to sway them. A father actually asked me that exact question not that long ago, and he was really frustrated. He said, I told him that he should do it on Sunday. He had a whole free day, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but he didn't do it. And I said, you did everything right. You told him what he needed to do to get it done, and he heard you. He just ignored you. That's what they do. They ignore, but they're hearing it all. It's going in, and then when it's really stressful on Wednesday night because they have to stay up really late to get it done, because they all care. They really care about doing well. Maybe that will get lodged in long-term memory that it was an unpleasant experience. And it's why I call middle school the last best chance. It's the last opportunity to really get in there and parent and share your values and the things that are important to you. Of course, you have to do it in a very, very clever way, and I'll talk about that too, so that they don't think you're lecturing them, judging them, criticizing them, overreacting, being too intrusive, talking to them at all, about to ask them to do a chore. The list goes on, so you have to be very, very crafty in how you get these points across. But they do really care, and as they go to high school, they start to pull away more. And they also don't have the same freedom to experiment because everybody starts specializing. And if they're on the newspaper, maybe that takes a lot of time. If they're playing a high school sport, that takes a lot of time. Middle school is really an opportunity to experiment. What makes it challenging is that they don't really want to do anything that carries the risk of embarrassment. So we can help them recover from things that don't go wrong and continue to take those risks. And that's where these superpowers come from. Super flexibility is about the ability to manage change and uncertainty. The reason that's so significant for middle schoolers is because they are changing faster than they have at any other time in their life other than birth to age 2, and they're changing in every single way. Athletically, emotionally, intellectually, academically, socially, physically. Every emotion is a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10. That's a lot. And often they're also changing schools, and the academic demands are higher. And it seems to them like the stakes are higher. And suddenly parents might seem like they care more about grades. Maybe this is the first time they're even getting grades in some schools, or getting grades that feel a lot more objective rather than subjective. Super belonging, which is what I'm going to spend a long time talking about tonight, is the most foundational of the 12 superpowers. And there's a big difference between fitting in and belonging. Kids don't really intuitively know the difference. It's why they want that Stanley Cup. It's why the girls want to buy the really expensive face cream that you shouldn't really be using until you're in your 50s or something, and that you cannot wrap your mind around because everybody else is doing that. And they hope that that will give them whatever social capital they need to feel like they fit in. What they're really seeking, though, is belonging. And I'm going to talk about that as well. Supersight is the ability to predict how what you say might land, how it might impact somebody, to predict, with the work example, how not doing your work might put you in a hole in a few days. And they really have a hard time with that as well. It's why they make so many mistakes. We're going to get there. Super bounce is about recovering from those mistakes, even leveraging them to learn. Super agency is about feeling like you're not a passive victim of fate, that you are in the driver's seat, that you can be proactive, and that you can make a difference, no matter how incremental or small, to improve your own life. And I think that one is really important, not just for tweens, but for post-pandemic tweens and teens, because they have spent so much of the last several years feeling like they don't know what they can hold on to with certainty. Super force field, this one applies a little bit more to girls typically, and it's about setting boundaries. And I don't think this is language we often use with kids. Many, many adults don't know how to set boundaries. And with girls in particular, we spend so much time telling them that they should be kind, they should be nice, they should be a good friend. And we never talk to them about what they can do if it starts to feel like it's too much. The classic example is the kid who's got a friend who's struggling in some way, and it's a problem that's too big for them. And they're texting them all night, and the friend is crying and really emotional, and they feel like they can't extricate themselves. We need to be able to help them do that as well. Super security is about having a healthy self-identity, being able to consider other people's perspectives at a time when there's just tremendous pressure to conform to the norm and not be different in any way. And different is not just the biggies, not just the social identifiers that we readily think of, like race, ethnicity, socioeconomics. It's also things like having a learning challenge or being adopted. It could be that your parents are divorced and you're going between two houses. It could be that you live farther away from the school. It could be that you don't have the Stanley water bottle. It could be anything. It could be that your parents don't let you have sleepovers. And we want to be approaching them with the empathy of understanding that whatever that anxiety is that we're picking up on, a good portion of it probably relates to feeling like in some way they're going to be an outlier in that situation. Super healing is about self-regulation. Middle schoolers don't have a particularly deep feelings vocabulary. They have a hard time asking for help, and they cannot come up with the right solution if they don't know what's going on in their internal life. One of the best things you could do is look at your child and label what you think they're feeling, and you are going to get it wrong. And that is okay, because if you get it wrong, they're going to tell you what they do feel and what is the accurate way to describe what they're feeling. And that's really good information too. Super vulnerability, if kids are struggling with a bigger mental health issue and they need to see a therapist, or if they are having a lot of negative talk, self-talk, dark thoughts, if they're cutting, some of the more serious things we've been seeing in recent years, that chapter is about getting them the right support. Super balance relates to social media and helping kids who have zero executive functioning skills figure out how they can manage everything in their life. Earlier today, I was talking to an assembly of 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, and I gave them the metaphor of the rock, pebble, sand. And imagine the rocks are the must-do, school and sleep. And the pebbles are the should-dos, you know, an after-school job or a sports practice, homework. And then the sand is the want-to-dos, getting online, doing social media. It is not at all intuitive to a middle schooler, or even frankly these days, I can say this as a parent of a 15-year-old who's a sophomore in high school, older teens, this is stuff that they're all still working on, that if you put the sand in the jar first, you can't put the rocks and the pebbles in. You have to get the big stuff out of the way first, and they really do need to be taught that. And I always underscore that it's not that one is more important than the other. Obviously, sleep and nutrition and school, those are really, really important. But the social stuff is important too. Being able to connect with their friends is important too. We're not saying that we don't care about that. We are just helping them organize their time in a way that it makes sense. Super daring is about taking risks, going out on a limb when you are so exquisitely self-conscious. One of my favorite memories, I mean, in a sort of morbid way, was at my last school. When I first showed up, it was very, very close to the beginning of the year. It was a totally different kind of school. They had me teaching, you know, mindfulness to kindergartners. I had no mindfulness skills or kindergarten teacher skills, and so it was like chaos. But every now and then I would go back to work with the middle schoolers. We were just trying to figure out where I was going to fit in that school. And I remember going into the bathroom, and there were a bunch of crying 7th grade girls. And I was like, oh, okay, this I've got. I was almost relieved. But it also seemed odd to have so many at once. And I said, what is going on? They didn't even know me yet. And they told me that they had to do something called a tiny TED Talk. And a tiny TED Talk, turns out, and I was learning alongside them, they had to give a 3-minute speech on camera, like I am right now, to everybody in their class and all the advisors in the grade about something very personal, some salient part of their identity, like being bad at sports when your parent is a professional athlete, or having dyslexia, or being a different race than most of the other people in the school. These were like big deal things for anybody, and they were expected to do it on camera in front of everyone. So they were all crying in the bathroom. And I totally got it. I'd be crying too. So I said to them, on a scale of 1 to 10, how big of a risk is this for you? I was trying to wrap my head around it. And they're middle schoolers, so they said it was 1,000,000. No such thing as a 10. So then I said, okay, if we were going to find a risk in that 4 to 7 range, something that got you outside your comfort zone, but that didn't push you so far or so fast that if it didn't go well, your amygdala, the fight, flight, or freeze part of your brain would be screaming danger whenever you're in that situation again, and you would avoid it, what would that risk look like? And this is why I love middle schoolers. And this is also why we cannot impose our own ideas on them. We might have our own ideas of what that 4 to 7 range might look like. We might be tempted to tell them, and we would get it wrong, because I swear one of the kids who didn't want to do this activity, and there were boys who were crying too, I just wasn't in their bathroom. One of those boys said he was fine doing it as long as he could do it with his back to the room. That sounded 10,000 times worse to me. It would have been the last thing I would suggest. Not only might you be getting judged, you don't know if they're judging you or laughing at you. And they all had different ideas. And I went to the teacher and I shared what I thought we needed to do. And she was really anxious about doing that. She was worried that if she gave that accommodation to some of the kids, that everybody would want that kind of special treatment. And I said, well, this is an experiment. I don't think that will happen, but let's see. And that's not what happened. The kids really did understand that they all had different levels of risk tolerance, and that kids are frightened in different situations. One kid is going to have no problem getting up in front of a whole group and is going to have a terrible time inviting someone over, or they don't want to be the host because it feels like too much work to bear the burden of making sure someone else has a good time at your house. That was my oldest. He was so well liked, and he would never invite anyone over. We'll get back to that later. And then the last one here is super optimism, and this relates to just being a human being today. Keeping your sense of humor, feeling hopeful, even when things seem so out of control, so chaotic. For kids right now, they're growing up with so much, from never getting a break from social media to the pandemic and coming out of that and not having that certainty, to continued school disruptions, to school shootings. And my own child was in 6th grade when school closed. If you ask him, he will very wryly tell you that that was the period where he sat on the couch feeling depressed and getting fat. And he's only half joking. It was a really, really hard time for a lot of kids. And even though things are normal, and even though it's been a while, they're still making up for lost time, and they're still working on the skills that are lagging. So that's the high level. I'm going to jump into some really specific stuff now. These are just some of the specific scenarios that I hear a lot of. It's just thematic. I've always been nice to her, but now she's so mean to me. That often is the kid who was really close to a group of friends in elementary school. They mature at different rates. It can be really hard for parents, too, to see that happen, especially if you're friends with the other parent. Really encourage them not to blow up bridges, though. Those friendships can cycle back in later. Anyway, that's hard, and it's hard not to take it personally. And I'm going to get back to the idea of meanness and bullying, because it's more complicated than it looks on the surface. Next one here, she'll hang out with me one-on-one or at school, but she doesn't invite me to do things when her group is doing things or his group is doing things. And that's a complaint I hear a lot too, and it also feels personal. Help your kid understand what's happening. It's very, very hard to get a group of friends in middle school. That is a hard-won thing, to feel like you have a group of people that you can hang out with. Kids don't want to upset the apple cart. Often they worry that if you bring someone else into that group, somehow it will change the balance. And they really do like your child. It just has to do with that group dynamic. Something that you can do I just learned about the other day, and if you want to read more about it, I wrote about it in an article about helping lonely boys in particular. It came out today in CNN, so that goes into more depth on this. But I spoke to a researcher at Dartmouth College named Janice McCabe, and her research is on social networks. And one of the things that she suggests asking kids, and I think it would work really well with middle schoolers in particular, even though her research is with college kids, because you're not prying into their personal life. You're just talking about social networks more broadly. And she's identified 3 types. There's tight-knitters. Those are the kids who have that one group, that one tight-knit group. There are compartmentalizers, kind of floaters. They have a lot of different groups. And then there are samplers, and those are kids that have a lot of one-off friendships. And you can talk to them about the pros and cons of each of those kinds of networks. If they are samplers, they might have really trusting, close friendships, but they don't have anyone to do anything with. That was one of my students recently at New Year's who was really upset. Really athletic, really well-liked. I'm now at an all-boys school, which is a whole other thing. And yet he was lonely because he had nobody invited him to join them for New Year's, even his friends, the people that really, really liked them. And they weren't trying to exclude him. He just wasn't really part of that nuclear group. You can be a sampler and you can be a compartmentalizer and have lots of groups to go out with, but you don't necessarily feel you're bonding with someone. And what we want is for our kids to have a combination of both. And I'm gonna return to that a little bit later as well. She's so clingy and needy. The classic example of this is a girl who came to me and she was so exasperated because the second she walked into her friend's house, it was a 7th grade girl, to sleep over, and she liked this girl, but the second she walked in, the girl would say, "I'm so glad you're here. Will you sleep over again next Saturday?" Like the minute she walked in. And she felt totally suffocated by this and didn't know what to do because, again, we tell them to be nice. It felt rude. And she didn't have the language. She needed some strategies. And it still, even once we came up with the language, which was simply to say, "I love having sleepovers with you, but I also sometimes like to have plans with other people too," it took her probably a month to get up the nerve to actually say that. And we as adults tend to underestimate how big a social risk is for kids. We're, in a very well-meaning way, saying, "Why don't you just invite them over?" And they're like, "I cannot make eye contact with them in the hall. How do you expect me to invite them over?" They need a lot of coaching. I'll embarrass myself that's like the TED Talk example. I have school friends, but no real friends. Also gonna return to that. And then why does everything have to be a competition? And this typically is boys. We had a situation at my last school, which was a co-ed K through 8, and the PE teacher gave the entire grade Fitbits and told them to count their steps. The girls were like normal human beings. Okay, we'll see how many steps I have. The boys, and I had no idea they had given out the Fitbit, but the boys, all I knew is that they kept racing by my office and they were like dripping in sweat, and I did not know what was going on. That PE teacher didn't do that again. They're super competitive, but they don't necessarily want to be that competitive. It can be really draining. And there are differences in the genders that I'm going to talk about as well in 1 second. So girls, as I said, they feel like they need to be nice. They don't want to do anything that is going to upset a peer. They might not try out for a play for a specific part that their friend had declared they wanted to get. They might not run for office if they think they'll step on the toes of somebody who wanted that same position. They really worry about loneliness. They don't want to disappoint anybody. They don't want to let anybody down. They don't want to fight with them either. They don't like conflict. I'm generalizing, but this is what the research shows. They tend to assume the emotional burden of supporting other people. Something that I noticed right away in my new school is that the boys were really adrift in a different way than they had been in my old school, because in my old school, they could just go to the girls for that kind of emotional support. That's not an option in an all-boys school. And they tend to struggle more with perfectionism, body image, all of the things. Boys are impacted by everything happening on Instagram too, but the research shows that girls are heavily, heavily impacted. Meanwhile, boys, they're more likely to be verbally or physically bullied. They want to be top of the heap. The stereotype, the negative stereotype that's not actually true about girls in middle school is that whole Mean Girl thing. They've all seen the movie Mean Girls. I asked them today, I said, how many of you have seen Mean Girls? And they were like, we saw it 3 days ago. Somebody else was like, I saw it 23 times. It's amazing, the staying power, because it just resonates in a way that can really impact how kids experience middle school. I always tell parents, especially if they're about to go, if they're in 5th grade, don't talk about middle school as a time to dread. It will actually change their experience of it. They're the ones, though, boys, they're the ones who are much, much more preoccupied with being at the top of the heap. And there's good reason. If they're at the edge of the herd, like they're like an animal at the edge of the herd, and they're literally less safe. So if they don't want to show weakness, it's because they really do put themselves at risk. That's a legitimate fear, and we always want to start from trying to understand what's getting in their way, helping them take those small risks. And again, they're less likely to have those same-sex, really supportive friendships. It's why I wrote that article that just came out today. All right, a few more things on super belonging. It's hard for them, even harder than it's ever been in the past, for kids to assume positive intent, to assume somebody did not intend to hurt their feelings, to assume that the teacher isn't calling on them not because they don't like them or think they're dumb, but because they just didn't see them in the back of the room, or to assume that the teacher docked them a point on a quiz but not someone else, just because they weren't paying that much attention. There's so many things that happen in the course of a middle schooler's day, or an older teen's day as well, that it's easy to take it personally. And because in the same way that TED Talk was a million on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of how scary it was, they go straight to the absolute worst case scenario. I'm thinking about one of my former students who was a middle school boy, and something happened on a Friday that I didn't know about. And on Monday, he was having a hard time paying attention. He was really irritable, to the point that he was having a hard time staying grounded in his body, sitting in his chair, and a teacher said, "Why don't you go talk to me?" And he came, and it took a little while to figure out what had happened and why he was so out of sorts. And then he told me what had happened on Friday. His friend group, his close friend group, all got together without him. Obviously, they were excluding him, not just because they didn't want to spend that evening with him, but obviously it was so they could spend the whole night talking about him and trash talking him. I love that. Another reason I love middle schoolers, they really go to the ends of the earth on the negativity. They're so dramatic, and they really don't even hear how dramatic they are, but that is where their brain is. And we sometimes have to go right there with them and then try to pull them back up. We don't want to be interviewing for pain or digging for dirt, mining for misery, all of those expressions. Again, like talking about middle school in a bad way, it tends to bring them right back down, but we'll come back to that. So I said to him, "All right, that sounds really hard." And we always want to start by validating whatever they're feeling. I said, "I would feel pretty bad too if I thought my close friend group all got together without me so they could spend the entire night," nobody is as egocentric as a middle schooler, "so they could spend the entire night talking about me in a negative way." He was like, "Right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it sounds awful." And then I said to him, "I want to play the maybe game. I want you to come up with at least one alternative explanation other than you're a loser, you're never going to have friends again, and everybody hates you, that they didn't invite you." And this is key. I said, you do not have to believe the alternative reason. Because if we tell them they have to believe it, they're not going to be able to do it. And it can be absurd. It can be anything. Because what we're trying to teach them is cognitive flexibility, just to challenge that negativity. That is the skill. It has nothing to do with that one particular scenario. So this kid took a little while, and he said, "Can I write it down?" And I said, "Sure." Gave him a piece of paper. Took a little while. And then he said, "Do you want me to read it to you?" He came up with one idea. And I said, "Sure." And he said, "Well, I'm thinking maybe they're all on the baseball team and I'm not on the baseball team, and they had practice on Friday, and maybe they just got together after baseball practice, and it's not that they were trying to exclude me so they could talk about me. Maybe they just didn't really think about me at all. I wish they had, but maybe they just didn't think about me." And then he looked at me and he goes, "Oh my God, I think that's what happened." So I got lucky, but I would have been fine even if I hadn't convinced him, because that wasn't my goal. And you can do that for any particular thing that they come home. Help them think more flexibly. Tell them that they don't have to believe it in the moment. Similarly, if they're really relentlessly negative and beating themselves up, explain that it takes 5 positives to make up for 1 negative, and have them brainstorm as many positive things about themselves as they can. If they're struggling, add to the list for them. Ask them what a friend would say about them. Ask what their grandmother would say about them. And tell them that when they hear that inner critic, to force themselves to read all of those compliments. And again, they don't have to actually embrace them and believe them in that moment, but we are teaching them not to go to that worst case scenario. All right, the next one here is meanness, bullying, or emotional discomfort. So Bullying, 3 Ps. They're trying to hurt you, that's the purpose. There's a pattern, it's not a one-off mean comment, it's happening a lot, and there's a power imbalance. 5 against 1, lots of social capital against somebody who's maybe struggles in that area, older, younger, in any way, bigger, smaller. That very rarely happens. It does happen. There is classic bullying, but it very rarely happens. When it does happen, they need support from an adult. That's one of those situations where they need support. Meanness, which is somewhat more frequent than bullying, is when you've got 2 people on equal footing and they're being rude to each other, or they're gossiping about each other, or they are saying something unkind, or somebody makes it might not even have been on purpose. They make a joke that didn't land the right way, didn't think it through. When that happens, you can coach them, you can help them think about the solution, but you want them to do it on their own. You want them to solve that problem on their own. They can handle that. 98, if not 99% of the time, what I see is not bullying and not meanness. It's emotional discomfort. And what do I mean by emotional discomfort? Well, pretty much everything if you're in middle school is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable just to watch them. If you saw did anyone see the movie Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse? That scene where he can't tell if he is going through puberty or if he has supernatural superpowers because he's so uncomfortable in his own skin. I always think of that scene when I think about middle schoolers. Emotional discomfort is when you have a really good friend and they also want to hang out with this other person who you don't like, and you have to choose. Am I willing to hang out with both of them in order to be with that one friend, or do I need to move on? Emotional discomfort is when you wanted to be invited to a party and they didn't invite you, but really, if you're being honest with yourself, you hadn't invited them either. It's not mean. It's just uncomfortable. Your friends are going to a party and you're not invited and you wanted to go. Emotional discomfort is when you're on a travel sports team and everybody goes to school together and you don't, and you feel like they're excluding you, but they just don't know you. Emotional discomfort is when you walk into a cafeteria and you have that surge of where am I going to sit, and you look around and try to catch people's eyes and nobody starts clapping and saying, please come sit with me, because that doesn't happen, but they want it to, and they have to somehow figure out where to go sit. All of those things are emotional discomfort. So when they come home and they tell you someone was mean or they were bullied, listen really carefully to whatever that story is, the details, because if it's emotional discomfort, we want to label that for them and we want to validate that it's hard, and then we want to problem solve with them. So there's another, it's on the next slide, but there's another thing that talks about the difference between friend, stranger, or acquaintance. And when it comes to that emotional discomfort, often it's because somebody didn't invite them to something. And what happens is that when you're listening to them, you realize that that person isn't even a friend. They're a school friend or an acquaintance. And it's tempting to just kind of go into the muck with them and be hurt with them, but you can reframe it for them and say, you know what I'm hearing is that this is somebody you really want to get to know better. This person is an acquaintance right now, and you want them to be a friend. So let's talk about what you can do to turn this into more than just a school friend. And it's not intuitive at all. Actually, it is right there. This is what happens when I don't wear my glasses. The last one here is to talk about the downside of having a best friend. And Dot mentioned I grew up in Newton. My best friend was Lynn. If Lynn's watching, hi. We are still friends to this day, which is very unusual. However, we had a little blip in 7th grade when things didn't go so well. And some of the classic things happened, which is part of the reason, but not the whole reason why I'm opposed to this idea of a best friend, which is, by the way, a much, much bigger deal for 5th and 6th graders than for older kids. They think it's super protective. Other people have a best friend. They think they're somehow lacking in some way if they don't have a best friend. That's real to them. What happened to me is that after 5 years of being best friends with Lynn, we went in different directions in 7th grade and really went in different directions. And neither one of us had much of a social safety net. And there were a bunch of people who probably would have taken us into their group, but were kind of bent out of shape because we had been so cliquish when we were hanging out. So that's the obvious reason that I'm opposed to the idea of a best friend. But the real reason I do not like the whole best friend thing is because all the research shows that the kids who are the most successful later on in high school and beyond, most emotionally healthy and well, the most adaptive, the most resilient, most successful even academically, are the kids who are floaters, kind of like those compartmentalizers, the kids who can talk to anybody and can go around from group to group to group. And there's only one way to be that person, and that is to bolster your social skills and talk to people who are not like you. If you are only spending all your time with that one best friend, and I can pretty much guarantee you that best friend is someone who has a lot in common with them, they are not working on those social skills. It is hard to get outside of your comfort zone, but it is such a critical skill, especially later on. All right. So a few more ways to help them with super belonging. Something that is misunderstood often is this whole idea of peer pressure. Even when I asked the kids today what they thought peer pressure was, they said things like, someone's gonna make me chug, or somebody's gonna say, if you don't give me the answers to the test that you took first period and I'm taking seventh period, I'm not gonna be your friend anymore. But that's actually not how peer pressure works. It's behavior contagion. And interestingly, to me, boys who are around same age, same sex peers are much, much more susceptible to behavior contagion, for better or for worse. And so simply telling your kids, you are who you're with. You know, think about how you're showing up. I had one student who kept getting in hot water in the group text chains. I'll never go out of business as long as there are group text chains. Please keep monitoring them. It's like there's a lot to that, and without the benefit of face-to-face contact and tone and context, and you put a whole group of 13-year-olds together, it can go really, really wrong. But in any case, this one kid was making a lot of mistakes in that group text chain. And I said, I want you to start thinking about when you're making those mistakes. And he realized that he was making the same mistakes when this one particular kid joined the text chain. And it was just a simple tweak. When that kid joined, he dropped out. And he was actually exercising that supersight I was talking about. He was predicting what might happen and thinking ahead in a way that he might not have done had he not had that conversation. And he didn't have any more issues. It truly was that other person who just kind of brought out the worst in him. It wasn't making him do anything, but maybe he was trying to fit in, or he wanted to impress him or be funny. The next one here is about resolving conflict. I had a couple of students who were fighting over, these were two fifth grade boys, and they were fighting over who's better at Fortnite. Like locked horns. It was like intense. And I said to one of the boys, what do you need from your friend? And he said, I need him to admit I'm better at Fortnite. So I said, okay, and I asked the other kid, what do you need from your friend to put this behind you? And he said, I need him to admit that I'm better at Fortnite. And I kind of laughed to myself. It was sort of the classic boy thing, especially for fifth grade. And then I said to them, all right, if the friendship could have a vote, what would the friendship say it needed to survive? And again, these were good friends. They enjoyed each other's company. It was a bummer that they were fighting, even for them. And they both were able to let down their defenses and say, the friendship would probably say this is pretty stupid. And that's what we're trying to do, help them let down their defenses. Similarly, if they won't own their part in something, and this applies to siblings too, if they're arguing or fighting, I hear you, it's almost entirely his fault. I get it. You didn't do anything wrong. But if you had to own your 2%, what would your 2% be? We're trying to give them that runway back to admit just a little bit without feeling too exposed. And that's when you get that really good information. Next one here is about teaching concrete social skills. We did a spaghetti dinner the other night at my current school, and we had this, it was for the 6th grade parents and the 6th grade students. And we had the students sit with parents that were not their own. And then they did conversation starters. And it was a way for adults to share their wisdom with kids who were not going to be as guarded, and a way for the kids to share their experience with adults and kind of bridge that gap. But it was also an opportunity to help these kids practice social skills. A 6th grade boy doesn't have a lot of them. This is an area where they need a lot of support. And so we did an icebreaker, and the icebreaker was that the kids had to find an adult, and the adult had to find a kid, again, not their own, and find out 3 facts about them, which required asking 3 questions. And the kids were like, if they could have hid under the table, they would have hid under the table. And they don't really know me yet, a lot of them, because I'm brand new. So I just grabbed one of them that was like hiding behind a door, and I'm like, hey, you're my person now. And I said, okay, do you want to ask the first question? And he goes, okay. And I said, go ahead. He's just staring at me. And he goes, I don't have any questions. He really couldn't think of anything to ask. So I wasn't tremendously surprised. I said, okay, do you want me to start? He said, yes. So I said to him, do you have any siblings? And he said, yes, and he shared about it. And then I said, okay, your turn. He goes, okay, do you have any siblings? And that is what happened for all three. And so many kids, even kids who are well-liked, they do not know how to connect with one another. And we assume they're too old for teaching those kinds of concrete social skills. I've had incredibly socially adept 8th grade girls avoid recess or avoid unstructured social time or dances or anything along those lines where they're going to have to make conversation because they don't know how to do it, or they feel like they don't know how to do it. I've assigned wing girls and wing boys to people to go out there and help them come into the conversation. And sometimes I'll just be very direct and I'll say, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go up to a group of people that you think you want to have a conversation with, and I want you to listen long enough to know what they're talking about. Then I want you to ask a question related to what they're talking about when there's a pause, and then come back and tell me how it went. That one girl came back and she's like, that works. And I was like, great. Half of it was the skill and half of it was just feeling like she had something she could do. She had more confidence. Anytime you feel like you know what you're supposed to do, you're going to have more confidence. And by the way, if you have a son in particular in this age group, you have to tell them that if you stand next to a group of people and you don't talk, you're not part of the conversation. You have to say a few words. You can't just stand there. Not intuitive. Another skill that I try to teach middle schoolers that's deceptively simple and incredibly powerful with such insecure human beings is the ability to give an authentic compliment. I will literally explain what a compliment is. A compliment is when you tell someone something that you truly believe is special about them and that makes them different in some way. In other words, telling someone you like their sweater, that's fine, that's a compliment. That's great too, but if you want to give a really authentic, meaningful compliment, say something about their sense of humor or how they're a good listener and see if you get what kind of response you get. One of the things that often surprises kids is how good it feels to give a compliment. They know it feels good to get one. They didn't realize how good it feels to give one. So we want to be teaching them all of these skills and then some. If you hear meanness, you want to say something. And this is really tricky for parents. It's tricky for me too. We don't want to make it worse. We don't want to meddle too much. We don't want to assume we know what's happened when we don't. We don't want our kids to be mad at us. We don't want to say the wrong thing. Teachers, counselors struggle with all of this too. I used to hate calling parents to say their kids were mean. I would do anything to avoid it because we have such a fear-based parenting culture, and I would think that they would make the assumption that I thought they weren't a good parent or that their kid didn't have good character when nothing could be farther from the truth. The truth is that if your child has a front, they are sometimes mean. They are all sometimes mean. Most of it is social clumsiness. They are often, you can see it on their face, surprised that they make a joke that was intended to be funny, and it just didn't come out right. My oldest, who's now 21, is often correcting my youngest, especially last year when he was 14. He would often say things to him like, that's not a question, that's an insult disguised as a question. They're trying to connect, they're trying to be silly and funny, and it can come out the wrong way. All of the research shows that kids who really do use power and aggression to get that social status, they're stepping on the heads of people in a way that's really unkind, have really poor long-term outcomes. This is why I don't feel bad about making that call anymore. I feel like it's as important for me to help them as it is for me to help the kids who are being targeted, because they have higher rates of substance abuse, less higher education, more relationship issues, more job instability. There's even a region of the brain that's smaller in kids who didn't develop what are called the skills of likability, meaning they're a good listener, they're generous, there's reciprocity. Mitch Prinstein wrote a great book about this, the power of likability, and how we can focus on, it's not that popularity is bad. Popularity is fine. If a lot of people like your kid, great, that's fine, as long as they have gotten that popularity because they are good and kind to their friends, recognizing they are going to make mistakes. And in those moments, you hear it in the backseat of the car, say something like, oh, I'm surprised to hear you say that. You've always said such nice things about them in the past. Or, oh, what do you think will happen if you guys do that? Or can you even just saying, can you repeat that? And making them sit with it for a little bit longer, calling attention to it. Sometimes it can go by so quickly. you miss that moment. If they struggle socially, and I don't think I've ever talked to a parent group that doesn't have somebody in the room that knows that their child is too much for everybody. And it is hard to find somebody who is the right match for their kid. Often it's the kids who have ADHD, they're a little more impulsive, maybe they lack a filter, and it can be overwhelming to other kids. And I can see a few people nodding their heads. I love that parents really know that that's their kid. And what we do, and teachers do this too, counselors do this too, in a very well-meaning way, we pair them with those one or two really patient, kind kids who are good friend options for them. And that is not what we want to be doing, because what ends up happening is we overburden those kids who are those potential friends for the kid who's a lot for anybody, and ruin their chances of being friends with them. What we want to do instead is have them have lots and lots of brief interactions with a whole range of people without overtaxing any one of them, and providing as much structure as they need, whether it's going bowling or they're decorating cookies and not having it last too long, and maybe it's at a park, but doing what we can to help them bolster their skills and get that practice so that eventually they can have those friendships that with those kind, patient kids who would welcome them. They don't need them to be totally perfect, but it might be too much right away in the beginning. And we do that when we pair kids too in the school setting. All right, and by the way, the biggest difference in happiness is between, again, 0 and 1 friend. Anything beyond that is just bonus. Help them avoid burning bridges, and I mentioned that earlier, but I'll share another story. This was 2 girls who I'd known since kindergarten, and at that point they were in middle school, and they had spent years fighting. Every time they came to tell me something was going on, I would say to them, what happened? And they would say, do you want us to start at the beginning? And I would have to say, when is the beginning? And when they said kindergarten, I would say, no, I do not want you to start at the beginning. So these girls, it was just high drama all the time, and they were mean to each other. And they would try to get other people turning on one another. And the dads were losing their minds. The dads were calling the school, and they were like, please don't put them even in the same space. We're not letting them have sleepovers. They're bullies. Both dads were saying the other one was a bully. I agreed that they needed a break from each other because it was just so combustible. And eventually they agreed to have this break. So this one day they showed up at my office, and I looked at them and I said, what's happening? Because they were supposed to be on a break. It's like friends. And they said, we have a problem. I said, how can you have a problem? You're on a break. And they said, no, that's not it. You don't understand. And I said, okay, help me understand. And they said, we want to be friends again. And I said, okay, well, what's the problem? And they said, we don't know how to break it to our dads. We have to let them let it go too. They're changing so fast. I often reassure kids. The research shows that power dynamics shift. Kids who are mean can become nice. Social status isn't fixed. Lots of friendships cycle in and out. I can remember when my daughter was just on the edge of middle school, and there was a group of kids, I knew they were going to drop her like a hot potato. She was still playing with like Barbies, and they were ranking crushes and makeup. It was just a matter of time. And I really wanted to just tell her, like, find some other friends, because this isn't going to end well for you. And I knew I couldn't. Unfortunately, I knew too much, because if I did that, she would just try to convince me that I was wrong. So you have to be really, really patient and just ask questions and make observations. I've noticed you seem really kind of tense when you're with those people, but you're much more relaxed when you're with this other friend and you're your goofy self. What do you think that's all about? And you can kind of fan the flames on other friendships, take them out for ice cream after a practice, and do what you can, have a potluck with another family with the same age kid, and hope that when that inevitably happens, they have some kind of safety net. And sure enough, my daughter was dumped. She did, at that point, have some other friends, so it wasn't too painful. And those other friends ended up being her greatest friends ever. She's a junior in college. They're still her best friends. That's why I always tell kids, you don't know if getting what you want is a good thing or a bad thing. Getting dumped by a friend, especially if you were trying really, really hard to be in that group and were uncomfortable, you can be lonely in a group, as I said, could be a blessing in disguise. And those girls that dropped her also became her friends again later in high school. The girls were nice. They just weren't on the same page at the same time. So we want to be able to let them have that experimentation and let them grow. And I try to prove to kids that it's not about them. Nobody is targeting them or dropping them or dumping them because there's something inherently wrong with them. Literally every kid gets dumped by at least one friend. in middle school, every single one, because this is exactly when they're doing the work of figuring out how to be a friend and pick a friend. And we want them to do that work, because if you don't do it when you're in middle school, you might be the person who learns as an adult when you have a bad relationship. So we don't want to do that work for them. We want to support them and comfort them and help them regroup, talk it through with them, but allow that to play out. So the statistics that I share with kids are that if you look at the research, in 6th grade, only 1/3 of friendships make it from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. 12% of 6th graders have nobody name them as a friend at all. If you ask middle schoolers to name their best friend, only half of those people name them back. They don't even know who their friends are. They're these very fragile, mercurial friendships. And then if you follow kids from 7th grade to 12th grade, only 1% of friendships are still intact. And when I say that to kids, you can hear them buzzing. They're like, we're gonna be best friends. We're gonna be the exception. They're probably not. The truth is everybody is doing a lot of shifting and moving around. And that's reassuring. It kind of reinforces for adults sometimes all the worst tropes about middle school, but for kids, it's reassuring. All right, so now I'm gonna move on to all the social media stuff. Just out of curiosity, how many of your kids have access to either texting or social media? Text, even if it's just an iPad, they're online in some capacity, connecting with people online. Okay, so most of you. It's really, really hard, and I do not have all the answers. I'm just going to share everything I've got because it's something that I think all of us post-pandemic are working on with our kids. They're all addicted. They all don't want to miss out. FOMO is real. FOPO is real, fear of other people's opinions. And that plays out online because you don't know what people are saying about you if you're not online. You feel like you need to be there to kind of police what's happening. Lots and lots of reasons developmentally why they want to be connected online. And there's tons of research that it's damaging them. And so figuring out how to walk that line is really challenging. Some of the things that I really hold to firmly, and I'm not prescriptive because everybody's different and everyone has different levels of maturity and different capacity for handling it, for setting it aside, for shaking off whatever happened and returning to it, something else, some other part of their life, but no electronics in the bedroom. I used to say no phone in the bedroom, and then a couple weeks ago, I was at a school in Vancouver. It was an all-girls school, and I was talking to 7th graders, and I said, I'm talking to your parents tonight. Is there anything you want me to tell them? And one girl raised her hand and said, can you tell our parents that when they take away our phone, we don't get more sleep? And I said, you're gonna have to explain to me how that's possible. And she said, well, what they don't know is that I have other devices in there and they're all slower. So it just takes me longer to go through all of my communications. So now I say, like, search that whole room, like dig it up, look everywhere, and get all electronics out. Nothing good happens late at night online. Even the LED lights can interrupt their sleep. They need 8 to 10 hours. None of them are getting 8 to 10 hours, but they need it. A few of them are, the kids who really prioritize sleep. And they do better in terms of their ability to roll with all the punches if they've had rest. And if they're sensitive about something, they take that all into school the next day, so that interrupts their ability to concentrate. There's research showing that simply having a phone out, even if it's off, you're going to be less efficient and more stressed. You can share that research with your kids. If you have a phone visually available and it's off during a test, you drop a full letter grade. It is a distraction. One of my favorite tips from that I put in my first book, Middle School Matters, that a design thinker shared with me. He had twin middle schoolers who were so anxious about parting from their phone. They insisted that they had to have it on their body, even if it was off. And so he was playing around with different strategies, and they ultimately landed on, one of them put it in a sealed envelope and had it on the desk, so they knew where it was. That was how connected they were to the phone. The other one was willing to put it in a cabinet in the kitchen while they worked. We really want to be giving them some data so that it's not just us lecturing them. Something else that I think is helpful, especially if they are fighting with you about getting offline, and if you really want to tick off a boy in particular, turn it off in the middle of a game, like when they still have like a point left. Try to work out all those rules in advance, but then I share the research with kids, and this resonated with my own son, that if you spend more than an hour at a time doing something like gaming or social media where you're getting that dopamine hit from a like or from a point, that hit of dopamine is greater than the hit of dopamine you might get from an offline activity that you really enjoy, like making cupcakes or talking to a friend or going for a bike ride. And so you can actually lose enjoyment in things you really like if you spend more than an hour at a time online. So in my house, I tell my kid to spend, that he has to take a break every hour for at least 15 minutes. And odds are they will end up spending more time doing the thing offline than 15 minutes, and it's an easier sell. It's just that midway point. You can change the rules at any time. Sometimes I'll have kids who did great with the phone in 6th grade, and then in 7th grade they're sexting and they're blowing up their social lives and terrorizing friends by sharing dark thoughts. And then we have to revisit that phone, and the parent can take it away and say, you know what, I love you too much to let you blow up your life. Let's hit the pause button, and we're going to work on some of these skills, and then you can have it back. Let them know that you can change the rules at any time if they're not using it responsibly. The other thing about online is, and I talked about the rock, pebble, sand metaphor, one of the things related to that you can do is make a list together of everything that goes into a balanced day that's not online. And you're going to have different things, like you're going to have emptying the dishwasher or walking the dog. They are not. You'll agree on some things. And then suggest to them that they do everything that's on that list before they get online. And then they know they will have had enough time. So again, you're acknowledging that that other stuff is important to them, and it is, their social life is important to them, but they're being more mindful of how they're organizing their time. You can also help them think a little bit more critically about how it is or isn't working for them. So they can pay attention to how they feel when they get online and get offline from certain apps. And they really do manage them differently. I've had kids who hate Snapchat because they don't like the pressure to keep the streak going, and it just feels like they cannot disengage. I've had kids who hate Instagram because they feel like everybody else has this perfect life. And then I've had kids who like other things. Like my own kid loves TikTok videos of animals. It's how we communicate. He sends me an animal video, I send him one back. I'll take it. Whatever works, that's what, it doesn't interrupt his mood in any way. It doesn't impact him negatively at all. It can get in his way in terms of time management. But if they're doing that kind of metacognition and paying attention to what does and doesn't work for them, then they can put some controls in place to protect their well-being. Maybe they take that app off their home screen, or they turn off notifications for that app, or they disengage from that app entirely. Or maybe they put another app that forces them to take a pause and ask themselves those 3 questions. There's some fun apps that actually my son was telling me, his name is Max Stossel, came to talk to their grade, and there's this app that forces you to be mindful about why you're getting on, and that's the WWW. Why are you getting, what are you using it for? Are you using it to research a paper? Are you using it to FaceTime grandma? Are you using it to look at everybody else's perfect life and feel really crappy about yourself? Why now? Are you lonely? Are you bored? Are you procrastinating? And then what else? What could you be doing instead? Again, probably sleeping or doing some kind of work, maybe walking the dog, but there are lots of other things that they're doing, and they're not programmed to think it through. So we're just trying to help them hit the pause button. If the only thing they do is sit on their hands and count to 10 before they post anything, that's super powerful, because it actually takes longer for the signal to go from the back of their brain, that more primitive, instinctive part, to their prefrontal cortex, where logical thinking and problem solving and empathy and self-compassion is, and they need that extra time. An activity you can do with them, one of my favorite activities that allows you to share a strategy without lecturing them, you go through your texts, have them go through their texts or your social media, and they're going through their social media or whatever you use and whatever they use. You're not looking necessarily over their shoulder, and they're not necessarily looking over yours. And tell them you want them to find the one text or post that is aberrant in some way, and that you're going to do the same. And it might be that they disclosed too much about themselves, and then they felt self-conscious. It might be that they told a joke that landed flat. It might be that they sent something they shouldn't have sent. It might be that they asked somebody for the answers on something and then felt a little bit of shame or worry about getting in trouble. It could be that they shared gossip that they shouldn't have shared. And once they've identified that post and what's aberrant about it, ask them what the conditions were at the time that they did that. More often than not, there was some kind of emotional interference. They were trying to fit in with kids who they wanted to be part of their group. They were jealous. They felt insecure about something. Maybe they were angry. Maybe someone had done something. Maybe they're sleep deprived. Once they know what sets them up for success, they can make better choices. It's just like that kid I mentioned earlier who knew that when this one boy got on, everything would go down the tubes. He did that same kind of reflection. And then the last one on here, other than not trying to pretend that they have to, relates to getting their homework done. And they're all avoidant or perfectionist. They all have issues, and it's essentially all different forms of fear of an unknown future. Maybe they don't want to disappoint a parent. Maybe they don't want a teacher to know they don't know what they're doing. Maybe it's boring. Maybe they don't see the relevance. There's lots and lots of reasons kids don't want to do their homework. And if you pretend that they have to like it, you're not going to get anywhere. Keep it real. Sometimes we do things we don't want to do. You can still lift weights even if you don't like exercise. I have to pay these taxes. It's one of my adult responsibilities. What's one okay thing about it? Maybe in that particular situation, at least it's done. And it could be as simple as it's done, or maybe it will get easier with practice if you consistently do it. You won't feel as stressed if you fall behind. And then help them get all of the stuff that they're holding in their head. They all think they can hold it in their head, out of their head, and onto paper. Because the same brain that is holding all of those assignments and all the things that are on the different tabs in the school systems, different apps, and then all the stuff that's in the planner that the teacher told them to write in the planner. In addition to all of that, they're also preoccupied with the fact that somebody jostled them in the hallway. They're wondering what they're going to do that weekend. They're thinking about the fact that they're going to that practice with that kid who doesn't always pass to them. They're wondering how the teacher is going to respond to them because the day before they were annoyed with them when they asked for that extra point on a quiz. They're holding all of that. And the more you get out of the head and onto a piece of paper, and that is what cognitive offloading is, the more room there is for them to deal with all the emotional stuff. And so getting them organized is actually directly related to their emotional well-being. And my favorite concrete strategy, how many of you, your kids have a planner, like a monthly planner? How many of you, your kid uses it? Okay, maybe one? Yeah. It's really hard for a kid to use a monthly planner. It's not that they're being willful, it's just very, very hard developmentally for them to do that. What I find works much, much better, every night, it takes 5 minutes to do this. Every night, take a piece of paper, fold it in half, have them write today on one side and tomorrow on the other. Help them organize their thoughts, everything they have to do the next day, and include as many details as you can. If they have to bring in a permission slip or a lunch or a snack or an instrument, add that. When they go to school, tell them that whenever the teacher tells them something new that they have to do, to add it to that today side of the paper. If they do something on the list, cross it out. At the end of the day, whatever's left or whatever's new goes to the right side, to the tomorrow, and then get a new piece of paper and start over. Take that one sheeter that they can eyeball and put it on top of their binder. I like to use a piece of paper that's the same size as their planner or their binder, so that they're, at any given time, they're not toggling between different places, different electronic places. They're not looking at a monthly planner that they're never looking at anyway. It's just a lot easier for them. They'll eventually be able to have more sophisticated systems. I cannot tell you how many of my clients actually stop having anxiety when they start feeling compensated, when they start feeling like they have a handle on what they need to do. So that's balance. How are we doing for time? I've never once in the history of doing this finished a presentation, but that's okay. There's so much to talk about. I'll talk about one more area, or two more of these superpowers before I turn to questions. And I can, if there's not a ton of questions, I can always go back. So the first is never say do your best to a perfectionist, because it is impossible. It's literally impossible to do your best if you're a perfectionist. Something that I think is interesting is that research shows that using the phrase rough draft thinking can actually free them to take more risks. This is just rough draft thinking. Behavior activation, which was on the last slide, which is part of this too, is this simple idea that simply putting your name on a paper, or clearing your desk, or writing on a sheet what you need to do, or having a conversation about what they need to do, that little dopamine hit they get, that rush, that reward of just getting started can sometimes keep them going. You can, if you want to practice with that, say if they don't want to exercise or they don't want to go on a bike ride with the family, tell them that if they go for 5 minutes, they can turn around and go back home. they're going to finish the bike ride. Sometimes it's just getting started that's the hardest part. If they're anxious, and that shows up in so many different ways, and I always remind parents that academic anxiety is social anxiety. Everything is a social risk. Raising your hand in class and getting the wrong answer in front of your peers is a social risk. Trying out for a team, social risk. Inviting someone over, social risk. And social risks are massive in this age group. So I like to talk to kids about what their goals are. Let's set some brave goals. What is it you hope to accomplish? And by the way, they think that your life is a straight line from 7th grade to success. So make sure that you're talking to them about the bumps in the road. Like my kids know I was demoted from advanced math in 7th grade and that the teacher gave me a charity D. I really deserved an F. And they also know I was really relieved because I was finally in a math class that I understood. And that was a relief. I still remember my school counselor breaking the news to me that I was being demoted, and she was Newton. You know, it was a high pressure area. Even then, she was expecting me to be upset and to tell me that it was no big deal. And I was like, no, you don't understand. I'm so happy. And I don't think kids often understand how important it is to get that risk just right and to be at their level. There's so much pressure to achieve. So have them set that brave goal, and there's research showing that if kids write down their goals and put it somewhere they see it every day, they're 42% more likely to reach that goal. It's really important to talk about it. And then reframe their anxiety. And there's a researcher, she's now the president of Dartmouth College, but she's a neuroscientist. She's got a TED Talk on choking. She was a college athlete. And one of the things she talks about is how when kids get stuck on the wrong detail, they choke. And that could be in a test. It could be that they have math anxiety. It could be on the sports field. And so giving them a way to deal with that in that moment. My two favorite ones, because middle schoolers think they're so funny and they use them. One is to focus really hard on your pinky toe. I know, but it works apparently. Because if you imagine you're walking down steps and somebody said to you, I want you to focus on what your knee is doing. You're not gonna be able to walk in a fluid way, and you don't use your pinky toe for anything. So it just doesn't get in the way. They have no preconceived notions about that pinky toe. The other is to sing a song you know all the words to, like Happy Birthday, and it can get you to ease up. My favorite strategy for kids in the classroom is to do something called object awareness, where you carry an object into the room, and it could be a paperclip, it could be anything, and right before you take that test, you come up with 3 words to describe it, because if you have to retrieve language, your brain is like a light switch. You can't have your fight, flight, or freeze firing at the same time as that logical problem-solving part of your brain. And retrieving language turns on your prefrontal cortex, which turns off the panicky part. At home, if they're flipping out, throw a ball to them and tell them you want to count as you toss the ball. If it's a boy, they're just going to instinctively toss it back. Girl probably will too, but make sure that they're counting. Again, you're trying to get them to engage the language center of their brain. There's lots of little tricks like that. And then I like to give kids lots of things that they can do to calm themselves down, because not only are they science-based strategies that can help them, simply knowing there are things that they can do to help themselves in that moment, and this is more to do with super healing than super daring, can often tamp down their anxiety enough that they don't have the anxiety at all, that they're able to avoid it. So I teach them how to activate their parasympathetic nervous system. They can press on the acupressure point below their thumb on each hand and then switch. They can give themselves a tight self-hug. They can tighten and release their shoulders. They can splash cold water on their face. Sometimes I'll have kids do active mindfulness. I'll tell them to, and this is also language, have them walk around the hall and count their footsteps as I go. And I tell them that they have to actually report back how many footsteps it were, otherwise I completely forget why they were doing that in the first place. But anything we can do, whether it's social skills or a self-regulation skill, giving them those tools is going to tamp down their anxiety, is going to allow them to take more of these risks because they feel like they're in the driver's seat. There's something they can do to help themselves. They can practice and perform in similar conditions. So if they're nervous about trying out for the play, they can go into the auditorium when no one's there and practice. If they have that test anxiety, they can go take a practice test in the same room where they're going to take that test later. Letting them know it's all normal, but there are things that they can do to make themselves feel better. I'm gonna Russian roulette decide which of these last ones I want to do. All right, let's see. I'm going to go to super sight. All right. I've talked a little bit about this in terms of helping them pause before they act. I've talked about it with going through their posts, thinking about who would impact them. There's a few other strategies that I want to share. One is inoculation theory. This is research that shows that you can inoculate kids against poor decisions the same way that you can inoculate someone against a virus. It's actually really cool research. I'll tell you how it works. First, you preview a scenario where they're going to be tempted to do the wrong thing. So you might say something like, you're going to hear really good, juicy gossip, and you are going to want to share it because it feels really good to have all eyes on you, to have the best story at the lunch table. You can feel powerful in that moment. And it's fun. It's fun to have the best story. The second part of inoculation theory is giving them a compelling counterargument for why they don't want to do that. So you might say something like, you know what feels even better? Being known as a vault, being known as a person who everybody can turn to for help when they have a problem. And what's cool is you don't have to do this for every last scenario they're ever going to encounter. They learn to think that way. And if there's one theme of this night, it's cognitive flexibility and teaching them how to help themselves. And that is one way they can help themselves. Another way that they can help themselves is something called the values card sort or values activity. This is another one you can do with them, so you're not lecturing them, but you can actually impart your values in a sneaky way. The list of values I like to use is Brene Brown's Daring Greatly, which is available online. Print out 2 copies, one for you, one for them. Tell them you want them to pick the 10 values that most exemplify the way they want to show up in the world, the way they want other people to see them, the kinds of people they want to be surrounded by, the things that are most important to them. You're doing the same. It does not matter what 10 values they pick. Afterwards, have a conversation with them about why they chose their values. Share with them why you chose yours. And then explain to them that when they are in a tricky situation and they don't know the right thing to do, and a classic hallmark of middle schoolers is that they are absolutely incapable of not factoring in what they want when they make a decision. It's impossible. They're going to try to do the right thing, they're going to want to do the right thing, and they're going to do what they want. And they're going to find a way to rationalize it. And this activity is a way for them to do that gut check. So what you say to them is, when you make a decision and you think it's the right thing, or if you're not sure, or if you kind of have a sneaking suspicion that you're doing what you want, and that's okay, we're all going to do what we want, and that happens, and it's not that you shouldn't factor in what you want. Go back and ask yourself which decision is more closely aligned with the 10 values you chose, because it's a much more stable decision-making framework. You strip away all that emotional interference, wanting to fit in, not wanting to miss out, wanting people to think you're cool or funny. When I did this activity with kids, I used the example of somebody who was invited to a sleepover from somebody who was not that cool, and then they got a better invitation from somebody who was having a group party. And whenever I did that activity, every kid is able to totally rationalize why they should dump the first person who was super excited about them coming over. You know, you should always prioritize your best friend over a sort of friend. I mean, it's amazing what they can come up with. But when they do that gut check with the values, almost all of them change their mind, because the decision that's more consistent with their values is usually not ditching the person who was super excited to have you come sleep over for a better offer. And then I do what's called temporal distancing. I say, I want you to imagine it's 5 hours, 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years after the decision. Which one do you think you'll feel comfortable with? And kids always say they think they would probably feel happier with the values-driven decision. So we're kind of trying to save them from themselves, recognizing they're still going to make these mistakes anyway, and set them up for success as much as we possibly can. And with that, stop and make sure that we have a chance for you to ask me questions. I told you there's a lot. It's all in the book if you're interested.
I wish I had this book when I was in middle school.
Oh, thank you.
Or you.
I mean, most of the things that I wrote about, I definitely didn't know myself when I was in middle school. We didn't talk about this stuff in the same way. Yeah.
So, my kid is still 12 and a half, and we're about to give him a phone.
Yeah.
So, I was just wondering, I mean, we're trying to go through a couple of things, like
Yeah, I mean, help him make good decisions in there and stuff. Yeah, so good luck. Some of it's learning. They're going to make mistakes. And one of the most effective things to do is to actually do spot checks. You don't want to read everything because you'll be so bored. I made that mistake with my oldest back when he got a phone. And at some point we had a glitch where all of his texts were coming to my iPad, all of them, and there were so many yo mama jokes in there. And I went to him and I said, first of all, what's with all the yo mama jokes? Like, they're not funny. And he's like, I know. We just, and I said, well, you might want to tell your friends that I'm getting all of them. And also, I'm getting all of them. Make it stop. And he couldn't figure it out either. And it was so unbelievable to me how many there were. And this was a while back. I can't even imagine now. There's so many more apps. And he didn't even, I think he had one app at the time, if that. It was mostly just a group text chain. So monitor it, because they are going to make mistakes. And also monitor it to see if other kids are making mistakes, because we have to parent them collectively. I'm always surprised when I get a call from a parent who is alerting me about something that their best friend's child did inappropriately online. And that's new. It used to be that parents would call each other in those situations. And somewhere along the line, maybe it's pandemic related, parents got scared about sharing that stuff with their friends. So have conversations with the people in your community. Let them know you want to know that stuff. And talk about what kinds of information you'll share with one another. And think about what you want. Like, if I were a parent in that situation and my kid was making a mistake, I would want to hear about it from a friend. I wouldn't want to hear about it from the principal or the counselor. I'd like it to be handled, in a less public way if possible. So thinking that through a little bit. But I think we've lost sight of that, having those conversations with your friends' peers' parents. Yeah.
Trying to think how to formulate this. Do you have thoughts on for kids who are so anxious that they just won't try anything?
Yeah.
Tips for helping them get out there without going too far so that you
Can you give me an example of something they wouldn't do?
anything.
Like calling someone up or trying a new activity?
I'm with friends with like no activities, no
Yeah.
experiences, nothing's unknown.
Yeah, I mean, most of the time it's because they're afraid they won't know anyone or they won't be good at it. So sometimes just finding a friend to do that activity with. Yeah, I mean, you can also make it a requirement. Here's a community book, we're gonna go through it. We're gonna find one activity at a time. You don't have to do it more than one 8-week session, but you have to be trying something. And I'm happy to really research, maybe it will be something where they are more likely to find their tribe. And the only way to extinguish a phobia is through exposure. And it's really easy to enable our kids. I used to do it with my daughter in a different context. She would text me, sorry if this is ever watched by my daughter, but she would text me right after a test in middle school to tell me she had failed. She hadn't failed, but she was anxious that she had failed. And my instinct, even though I knew I shouldn't, was to write her right back and say, it's fine, it's a history test now, whatever class it is. I didn't want her to carry that. I didn't want her to be uncomfortable the rest of the day. I didn't want it to get in her way. And all I was doing was reinforcing that she couldn't do it. And I was struggling with that. And I said to her, and I'll tell you how this relates to you in a second, I said to her, I want you to know that when I get that text, it's excruciating for me, and all I'm going to want to do is write you back and try to make you feel better. But I want you to learn how to do that yourself. So I want you to know you're not going to get a text back from me during the school day. Also, why do you have your phone during the school day? It should be away. And I think you can self-soothe. I think you can handle this. With your kid, I think you can be honest. Like, it's really, really hard for me to see you unable to try something, and it's a lot easier for me to not make you do anything, because it puts you in this really excruciatingly hard situation, and you might cry, you might have so much anxiety that it interferes with your day. I don't like to see you suffer like that, but I know that if you do continue to keep trying new things, it will get easier with time. So we're gonna work together, we're gonna look at this book, maybe I'll pick 4 things, and then maybe there's one that you like of that group, or you can go through the book, but we have to do one thing each quarter or each semester. and then think about something that might be a smaller risk. So a big risk might be, an acting class or something. Or if she is terrible in her own head at art, an art class might be the worst. But there might be something that she just naturally gravitates to anyway, that she feels good at, and that would be where I would start, something that she's more likely to be successful. Yeah.
This is kind of a complicated one, but I'll see if I can articulate it. You talked at the beginning about like the makeup and the kids and
Yeah.
stuff, like hyaluronic acid, right? Like,
Yeah.
everybody wants to go to stuff around.
Yeah.
So I feel like with some things like that and other things that are viral on TikTok, some of those things are hitting the kids before they're hitting the parents. Right?
Yeah.
So they're being exposed to these situations where they maybe have to make a decision, and it might be that the group is doing something, they feel like, okay, I want to jump in and I want to do that because I want to look like I'm following along.
Yeah.
But there's a decision process there that is maybe not regulated for some of these kids, which this could actually be bad for them, inhaling confectionery sugar or whatever it is
Yeah.
they're doing on TikTok. How do you help us parents navigate that, not knowing what's coming in TikTok, but
Yeah.
having them have some of these situations that could be harmful for them?
You're not going to be able to preview every potential. I mean, who would guess confectioner sugar, hyaluronic, whatever you say, acid? Like, we're just as blindsided often as we could possibly be, and I say that even as someone who's around these kids all the time. Sometimes I'm surprised. Like the Stanley one came out of nowhere, it seemed like. So what you can do is appeal to their desire to not be manipulated. No middle schooler likes to be manipulated. These marketing companies are using you. The algorithm is feeding you this stuff because they want to get your money. They want to make you feel bad about yourself so that you keep going on. They're getting that hit of dopamine. You can talk about when they might feel tempted to do something like that inoculation theory. If you're looking periodically at what they're doing, it's not just to catch them if they make a mistake, it's also to see what images and information they're being exposed to so that you can have a conversation about it. They're seeing things on there that they're not telling us about for lots of reasons. Some of it because they shouldn't be seeing it, or they think they shouldn't be seeing it and they're afraid that they will get in trouble. Some of it is because it's really disturbing, like they might see a beheading or something and they don't know how to ask for support, or because they're worried that it's something that they really should not have seen. If we're on there and looking at what they're seeing and looking at how that algorithm is feeding them different things, you might be able to see that they're getting 4,000 different ads for skin cream or whatever, but just having that open conversation. And in conversation, because I didn't really go into this one in depth, one of the most common questions I get is, what if I don't know how they're doing or what they're doing because they're in their room and they're not talking to me? My friend calls it her son's grunting phase. She would say, "How was school?" and he would go, "Ugh." And that can feel bad, and it can also be very mysterious, and some of it is normal. They want to have more privacy. They want to have more time alone. They have a lot of recovery time after school. And so sometimes simply knocking on their door and saying, "I'm just checking in, everything okay? Can I bring you a snack?" And just doing that frequently, talking to them, asking them to show you how they use the apps that they use so that you're connected to what they're doing can help. Sharing statistics, sharing research, and getting a conversation started. That's why I shared that example of the different social networks. It's a way to talk about their friendships without talking about their friendships. So, but there's no magic, they're still going to make the mistakes. My former middle school principal used to say, when I call you to tell you that your child made a mistake, cheated, skipped class, vaped, wrote on the desk, said something racist, like whatever it might be, I mean, there's no end to the things that they can do. I want you to know I'm calling you because I want to partner with you. And he very deliberately uses that word "when" because it's true. They all are going to get themselves into a pickle. And that's okay. It's why I wrote the second book, because we can leverage those moments and help them learn from them and actually come out more resilient and better decision makers with more solidified values, more capable of connecting with people, staying on top of things in work, and with less anxiety. And we actually can't teach them all of that stuff if they don't make any mistakes. You learn a lot more from the losses and the setbacks than you do from the wins when everyone is cheering for you. Yeah?
So on that same topic, have you seen the movie Social Dilemma that came out 4 years ago?
Yeah.
Okay, so at what age do you think it's appropriate to show them that? Because I do show
Yeah.
And I do, that book has been powerful for me.
Yeah.
What age do you think that would be appropriate to share?
You know, each kid is different, but I always err on the side of assuming they can handle something a little more sophisticated and more informative than their age, because kids do better when they feel like we're treating them like an expert, that we see them as sophisticated and capable of absorbing sophisticated information. It's a great conversation starter too. I will share with you, I was in the Silicon Valley area, and I asked that same question, how many of your kids have phones? And these were all people who work in the tech industry. Nobody raised their hand. It was a hair-raising moment for me. I realized that the entire country had given phones to their kids, except for the people who are creating this stuff. Yeah. And if they tell you everyone has one, and I don't care what that applies to, it's not true. There's always outliers. I share a story too in Middle School Matters about my own son. He was in 8th grade, and he went on a school trip to China, which was a big trip. And they got to China, and they were jet lagged. They went to the Great Wall, they went out to Chinese food, they went back to the hotel, they went to sleep. At 2 in the morning, my son woke up. He was on a locked bus in an abandoned parking lot, bus depot, somewhere in Beijing, with no phone, no money, and no Mandarin skills. If he could get out of that situation, which he did, our kids in the United States walking from their house to school or to a friend's house are going to be okay, and we can communicate that to them. It is okay to buck the trends and try to figure out another way to meet that need. So if you've got a kid who's gaming all the time, and they're gaming because they want to connect with people, but they're awkward and it's hard for them to connect face-to-face, well, maybe you start with a gaming party and get them together with a gaming party. Or if they are, and those baby steps, like what we were talking about with the activities, if they are trying to spend all of their time on Instagram, what it might turn out is that they just don't want to miss out on anything. It's not so much Instagram, they just want to be connected to their friends or Snapchat, and then maybe you can make more of an effort to get them together face-to-face with those particular friends. Kind of figuring out what need it's serving and seeing if there's another way that you can meet it. It's really hard. There's like no answer. I'm struggling with this with my own 15-year-old. I can see a complete generational change between my older two and him, because the older two were the flip phone, and it was a little while before they had the smartphone, and it wasn't as pervasive, and there weren't as many apps, and they didn't have a pandemic until they were late in high school, so they weren't as addicted, and they had better social skills and more solidified friend groups at that time. It's just a different challenge with my youngest, but the more I learn, the more prescriptive I'm being in my own house with him. Yeah.
Sorry, another question I had was, could you recommend a couple things to do to actually encourage them to spend time face to face? Because
Yeah.
it appears like my son, he has not had a phone for the last year and a half, but in middle school, and he was struggling.
I think, yeah.
He can't even figure out how to start a conversation without.
Yeah, and that's really hard and really common, like that kid who couldn't ask me a question. And so you can give them an assist, you can brainstorm at home, like try this experiment, ask your kid a question, almost a basic question about one of their closest friends. You will be amazed how little they know. Like, they know nothing about their closest friends. My son was at camp, he was 12, and he was sharing a bunk bed with another kid. And every letter, he was telling me about what happened in his bunk with this particular kid, who was his good friend. And then we got a call, we had one call over the summer. And I said, what's the name of the kid you keep writing me about that is in the bunk bed above you? He'd been at camp for 5 weeks. And he goes, I don't know. I said, how can you not know his name? He's like, we just play. Like, I don't know what his name is. It just didn't seem important. That blew my mind. So if he's not connecting, he probably literally doesn't know how So brainstorm things he can ask a friend, ask him to come home with one new fact. If he's gonna be meeting new kids, think about questions he could go in there with, things he might want to know about. You can talk to them about something happening in sports, something that would give them some commonality. If you've got kids in your car, you can help them. You can do like an either or game, like Commanders or Chiefs, Apple or Droid. Have the kids vote and then have them say why they chose what they chose. They're either gonna find something in common or they're gonna have a conversation starter based on something that they didn't agree on. But we can give them an assist as much as possible. And for the kids who aren't inviting anyone over and are afraid and don't even know how, don't start with some kind of very intense 3-hour like conversational hangout in your house. Take them somewhere to do something, you know, it doesn't have to be expensive, but it could be something like mini golfing or ice skating or something where they don't have the burden of carrying on a long conversation, but can spend time together. Oh, another story I'll share. This was another parent, just to show how hard this is for kids. Her son had a good group of friends, and they liked him, and she was watching him try to make plans with them. So they were texting each other, and she was watching this text. And her son was saying to the friends, we should hang out. And they were like, yeah. And he was like, we should go somewhere. And they were like, yeah. And they were like, I want to hang out. And they're like, yeah, me too. And she realized that they didn't know how to do it. So she had to like give them the right questions to ask, like where are we going? What time? Who's taking us there? How are we getting home? And actually show them how to seal the deal. And so in the same way you taught your kid to tie shoes, they need to be taught how to do these things. It's really not as intuitive, I think, as many of us assume, especially for our extreme tweens, like our post-pandemic tweens.
Okay.
Thank you.